welcome back. Today we're going to be restoring this vintage workbench. Now this project's taken me about a year because I've been doing it across many other projects. I've been wood turning in the meantime and been doing woodworking projects. So finally I've managed to produce this video and get it all edited. So I hope you enjoy. Let's get going. So here's what we have to work with. I took a block plane to it to see what the wood was underneath. I'm not sure what this is, but it's a nice wood anyway. I really want to try and keep as much of the bench original as I can. Everything works on it, all the vices do. The only major issue is this leg, so I'm going to have to redo that leg quite a bit. The first step to this project was sanding, and this allowed me to see what the wood was like underneath. Now at the start of this project, I only had this small Bosch detail sander, which I did the majority of the project with. Whilst it does the job perfectly fine, it's just a lot slower than using a random orbit sander. And the reason I got my ERO random orbit sander was from doing this workbench, as it just took a long time to do it by hand with this tiny sander, so I ended up buying a bigger random orbit sander, which really helped with the project. If you're interested in watching the review for that, I'll leave a link down below. The other small issue with this sander was that I had to constantly empty the dust collection box, but that wasn't the end of the world. It wasn't a big problem in the scheme of things. I started this project in early October of 2020, so this project's been ongoing for almost a year now, hence why you'll see a lot of clothing changes because the temperature changed drastically, as I ended up finishing this project in August. So this is a Woden 186B/1 vise. It's quite a nice little vise, but I want to clean it up with some WD-40, get rid of some of the dust and some of the old grease on it. I have started sanding the bench. It's looking quite good, but it needs quite a lot of work still, and I'm not entirely sure what the wood was. I think it might be sapele, but I'm not entirely sure. But hopefully some people on Instagram will be able to help me with that. So let's crack on with restoring this vise. I then started to strip down the vise using some WD-40 to clean out any of the rough grime that I could see. Now you don't have to do this, but if I was going to clean the whole workbench, I might as well clean the vise and make it work as best I could. And I was surprised at how much mud and dirt and debris came off with the WD-40. It really did do a good job. So I've been cleaning up this engineer's vise, and I think it's a really nice bit of kit. However, there are some problems with it. If we look here, there's all this stubborn rubbish in here. So there's all this dirt, grime and horrible stuff. So this all needs cleaning out. I'm using a file for this, but a blunt screwdriver would work absolutely fine. I just don't know where mine are at the moment. However, I knew where this was, so I'm just scraping it all out. Hopefully you can see some of what's in here. If I just tilt it up, you can see all of the stuff in the back. So it's not the nicest of stuff in here, but whilst this won't actually affect the performance of the vise, it doesn't look that nice, and quite frankly, I would rather clean it out. So I'm just literally taking it out, giving it a couple of bangs off, and look at all of this stuff here. I mean, you can see what's come out of this, it's disgusting. So now we're just going to get some WD-40 into here and spray 2 or 3 squirts in there. So we sprayed a bit down there. I wouldn't worry about putting lots of WD-40 on it because it will stop the rust and it will help lubricate the parts that need to be lubricated. So I'm just trying to clean out the rubbish in there. And if we have a look here, I don't know how much of this you can see, but there's all of this that needs to come off of it. All of this rubbish here, we want to try and take all of that out. It's quite a messy job, because you can see this hasn't been cleaned in at least 10 years. I then cleaned the moving parts to the vise and the slide, which is where you essentially turn the vise, and I wanted to make sure they all moved really nice and freely. And then after that I reassembled it, gave it one more clean with WD-40 before putting it away to move on to the next step of the workbench restoration. So I've added a coat of water to this, just a very light coat, just to see what the colour of it is. And I have to say, I'm a big fan of how it looks. I quite like the rustic bit with all these wormholes in and these saw marks and the plane marks and everything. I was thinking about filling them all, but you know what, I actually think it really adds to the workbench's character. So I'm actually going to keep it because I really think it makes the workbench look quite nice. There is a lot of water damage on this workbench, as you can see, so I need to do something about that. And this is the other Woden vise, which is this one here. This is in good condition as well. It just needs the wooden bits replaced just there. So I like this vise, I think it works rather nicely. The only issue I found is the handle is bent. Not that that particularly matters. And then we've also got that huge problem of that leg to fix. See, it's a bit uneven with that. And I also need to rebuild the drawer that sits inside of this. So the drawer will go in these two sections here, and I need to remake that. So here's the drawer in its current state. I've taken these out, these slide into here, into there. So I'm actually going to take all of these bits out. The only bit that actually needs replacing is the bottom of the panel, and the handle needs a jolly good clean. But essentially, it should just about slide in still. So it just needs a little bit of a rework to get it to fit nicely, but it does work. But you can see the issue of the drawer bottom has completely come out there. I then started to disassemble the drawer. Now unfortunately the drawer really wasn't in great condition. I originally thought it was going to be salvageable, but the more I started to strip it down, the more I realised it was just not going to work. So as you'll see later, I ended up remaking it. So I've done my best to salvage the inside components of the drawer sides, and to be honest, well, I'm not that convinced that this is actually going to hold with a new piece of plywood on. I'm going to give it a try. The nails though, some of them have actually managed to shear the bottom of the nail off because they're just so rusty and brittle. So I've got all the nails out that need to come out, so that's a positive to take from it. But I'm a little bit concerned because one piece of the wood that was holding all the nails in did manage to snap off. So I think we'll have to fill that with some sort of filler, or maybe a bit of wood or a dowel or something like that, and try and repair that. The drawer handle could do with taking off and bending back into shape, so that will be my next sort of, I guess, target to do, is fix the handle. I have also noticed there is some buckling here where one of these drawer components is supposed to be sat, so we'll do our best to salvage that. If not, I'll completely remake the drawer from scratch. So I was going through my scrap wood pile and some of my drawer fronts, which I've got here, and I just so happened to find an almost perfect colour match for the drawers. So as you can see, that's going to match pretty well. So that's going to have a coat of board linseed oil. It's already got one on, but I'm going to use that to make the drawer front to replace the broken drawer, which would have gone there to there. It's too far beyond repair. I can't repair it. It's all just rotting away and crumbling away. So I'm going to make a brand new one. Then I've got the oak to make the drawer runners. I'm not going to use the same wood for the runners. It doesn't really matter, and to be honest, it will look quite nice anyway. It's a nice contrast. So I've got tons of these panels, so I'm going to use those to make all of the drawers from. I've also got a load of old brass handles, so I'm going to use some of those to make a handle for this drawer. To start the making process of the drawer, I took one of the old brass handles and started polishing it with some wire wool. After I'd got most of the old grime, I then moved on to some brasso to really give it a nice shine. Well, this came up an absolute treat. Cannot believe the shine in that. I mean, you can almost see my reflection in it. That is incredibly shiny, and against the new drawer front, that's going to look absolutely spectacular. Okay, so I've had a look at the wood I've got here, and I've decided that I'm going to make the drawer 60mm deep. So what we're going to do now is we're going to rip all these down to 60mm. This should give me plenty of timber to work around with. If not, I'll just cut this board up as well. And to be honest, I think this is going to get, I'll get one out of it definitely. This one I should get two out of. Just depends how deep that groove goes. Okay, so I can get two drawer fronts out of this one, so I should have enough between these three panels. So we're going to cut those down to 60mm now and rip them on the bandsaw. So in my opinion, the easiest way to lay this out is with one of these squares. So we're just going to use that. Hopefully this is somewhat square. So we'll measure this up at 60mm. Doesn't matter if it's slightly under or over, as long as it's consistent across every piece. So then we're going to take the combination square, and we're just going to glide it along the piece of timber with the pencil. Now it's easier if you do this on a flat piece of your workbench, and also much easier if it's clamped down.
I then marked out all the pieces onto the drawer fronts, ready to cut onto the bandsaw. I then set up the fence on the bandsaw, running them through at about 60mm, and then I could glue it all together after doing that. I also made sure to cut some drawer slides, and I just did that on the bandsaw before moving over to the miter saw to chop all the boards to the exact size.
So with the pieces now cut, we're now going to assemble the drawer. So I've got a piece of MDF here. So I'm just going to line up all of the pieces. I did have to recut one of them, as in cut a bit more off the end, because I forgot to account for the material thickness. But no harm done. I'd rather they were slightly oversized than slightly undersized. Okay, so that's what we're going with. Hopefully you can see that if I just swivel the camera a little bit. There we go, you can see it better now. So I looked at the original drawer, and that was done with just butt joints. So in keeping, and partly because I don't want to have to do any fancy joinery, I'm going to keep it the same. So we're going to slap some glue on it. I'll probably put a couple of nails. Then we'll put the bottom on, and then we've got this brass handle which cleaned up an absolute treat, which is going to go on the front face, and I think that's about it, to be honest. Then we'll put a bottom on the drawer. And yes, you can still see the nail holes from these original drawers, but it's a bit of character and it really doesn't affect the use of the drawer.
I then put a bit of glue on the end grain and allowed that to dry. This stops loads of glue soaking in later and helps keep the drawer more stable and helps with the glue up. I then put some Gorilla Glue onto all the corners and clamped it up using my Axminster bar clamps. I really like these clamps for glue ups like this, as they have a really wide surface area, so it makes it really easy. I then cut a piece of plywood to make the base. Now unfortunately I couldn't cut this on a bandsaw, which meant I had to cut it by hand, which wasn't the end of the world, but I'd much rather have used a bandsaw. Now I'd kept all of the nails from the original drawer, so I decided to use a few of those on the base plate of this. I couldn't salvage them all, but where I could use some of the old nails I thought it'd be quite fitting to, so I did manage to salvage a few. I then took a piece of wood with some sandpaper wrapped around it to clean up all the edges and just get rid of any anomalies in the surface. So there are a couple of bits where there was a little bit of overhang, so I just sanded that to make it all nice and smooth and flush, before finally cutting the drawer slides, fitting those on, and then that was pretty much the drawer ready to go. After gluing the strips on, I then applied a coat of boiled linseed to the whole drawer. Now this was the same boiled linseed that I'll be using on the workbench, so I thought I should keep it the same so that I get the best colour match possible, and I was pretty happy with the overall colour match in the end.
So before I look at repairing the foot, I want to do something about this tenon. Now I've had lots of chats with people on Instagram about ways to do this, but the simplest option that people gave me was just to drive 2 screws into the tenon. Don't do it from this side so you won't see them, obviously. If you do them on this side, they'll be hidden away. So I'm going to do that on this side, and then obviously the bottom's got the bolt running through it, so it doesn't matter there.
I then drove in 2 50mm screws into each of the tenons and mortises, and these really helped strengthen the workbench.
So I've just put a bit of water on the legs like I did on the top, just to see how they look, and I think they look awesome. I really love the detail in this. I think this might be pine and the top is redwood, but I'm not sure. I really like the look of this though, and I think this looks great. So as I've been saying, I've been using the block plane for the majority to remove the bulk of the material, as you can see here, and then a sander to clean up the last bits. Otherwise this would take far too long just to sand it. But at the moment I'm really happy with how they look. So I've been working on this rotten bottom leg, and if I just demonstrate, it all sort of tears out of here, and it's horrible and rotten. I mean look, it just all breaks off. So I need to chop this leg, and there's also all these eggs to some spiders and things, which is just disgusting, which I think has caused a lot of this rot. So I need to get rid of all those. I'm going to treat it all with woodworm killer as well, just in case. I don't like that crack there either, and I'm going to try and put some glue in that and squeeze that back together. But this is a bit of an annoyance, to be honest, all of this rot. So I'm going to grab the saw and we're going to try and chop it out right now, hopefully.
I then raised the leg up slightly and chopped it with the tenon saw. Now the cut wasn't perfect, but it was good enough.
So with the leg now cut off, I want to fix the gap here. So I'm going to add some glue here, squeeze that down the best I can, and then we're going to work out how we attach a new leg. There is also this split here, but that's not a concern. So this is what I've done to the bottom. I've used a piece of oak, and it's not a perfect colour match, but it's good enough for this. So we're now going to work out how on earth I'm going to join this to here. But it's pretty solid, and the bench doesn't move around half as much as it did. So we're now going to put some glue on this end grain and let it dry. This is a lovely piece of oak. It's actually part of a pallet that's used for shipping and things like that. But it's actually a really nice piece of oak. I used it to turn a commission because I've got loads of it. I've got one whole post of this, and I needed a thick piece of oak, and I thought this may be oak, and it turned out that it was. So it's quite nice actually. I had a real surprise when I started turning it and saw how nice the grain was. It's not very often you see something so nice like this in a pallet, but the wood has actually got a really nice grain structure to it. So we're going to let that dry for about 10-15 minutes, and then we'll whack it underneath this. Okay, so the glue has mostly dried out on the end grain. I put a decent coat on it, as you should, because that just stops it from soaking up a load more glue when we go to put the glue on now. I'd rather there's more glue to clean off at the end than not enough. That's plenty. Okay. So hopefully that's going to glue up on there. There's no guarantees, but should, fingers crossed, be stronger than no leg at all. Now, this glue isn't going to be the only bit of strengthening. I think I'm going to put some screws down into it, especially at this front face here. So, start the drill like so. And the screws aren't going to look very neat, unfortunately. There's not a lot I can do about that though. So in the end, I did actually manage to get some clamps on. I found this huge 1 meter clamp, or maybe it's more than that. Now I did have another one, but it's too long, so I've used one of my Axminster bar clamps against the tenons here, and I've managed to secure it all in. So we'll keep the clamps on till 8 o'clock or so. It's about 7:10 now. I'll take those off, and then that'll be the workbench finished. I'll just put some oil on that, dust the top off, probably put another coat of oil on the top, and then yeah, take some shots of it. So I'm going to take the clamps off of the workbench and see how the leg's glued up.
Even though I did the oiling process before fixing the leg and making the drawer, I thought it'd be quite interesting to put this clip at the end, as this is sort of like the completion stage of the workbench. So I was just using some cheap boiled linseed oil for this workbench. It's fairly decent quality, and it's left a really nice shine onto the workbench. Nothing over the top, just a nice subtle shine. And it's also really brought out the grain and made it look a lot more like a vintage woodworking bench. And I think it's going to be something that I'm really going to use an awful lot when I do some more hand tool woodworking. I have had a go at dovetails now. Didn't go too well. I ended up doing a backwards dovetail, but I'm going to have another go at doing it.
Well, thank you to everyone who watched the video. I really enjoyed restoring this workbench. It wasn't the easiest thing I've done, and it's been about a year-long progress because I've been doing other projects in between, but I finally got round to finishing it. And yes, it does look quite vintage still, but that's the nature of the project. It's got the block planed parts, it's got some old rustic charm, and it should get a lot of use now.